Today I have a very important guest for a discussion of a couple of issues regarding Puerto Rico. I'm talking about the Representative Ritchie Torres from Congress, from New York and from the Bronx. Torres is very linked to the island. As many of you know, he is of Puerto Rican descent, and he has legislated about multiple issues that affect the territory. Okay, Torres, one of the issues that you have followed very closely is the energy crisis in Puerto Rico. Last week, you introduced legislation with the purpose to exempt energy products from the Jones Act. For those who don't know what the Jones Act is, the Jones Act requires goods to be shipped between U.S. ports in U.S.-built and flagged vessels. The exemption that Torres has called for will apply not only to Puerto Rico, but to the products transported to Hawaii, to Guam, and to Alaska. Torres, I'm going to start with this. In what way the Jones Act has become a problem to energy access in Puerto Rico and raised the cost?
So as you know, Puerto Rico has the single worst grid in the United States, and it's become a humanitarian crisis. The people of Puerto Rico are paying the highest energy cost for the worst grid. Mm-hmm. You know, Hawaii and Puerto Rico have the highest electricity cost in the nation, and that's not a coincidence. That's a consequence of the Jones Act, which raises the cost of energy. And so I have legislation that would exempt energy imports from the Jones Act in order to lower the cost of electricity and energy in places like Puerto Rico. I see the Jones Act as a tax on the energy needs of an energy poor island like Puerto Rico, and the people of Puerto Rico cannot afford taxation without representation. And so that's how we see it. And I'll give one example, and I'll compare the Dominican Republic to Puerto Rico. The Dominican Republic sources almost all of its liquefied natural gas from the United States because it's unaffected by the Jones Act.
Okay.
By contrast, Puerto Rico, which is affected by the Jones Act, sources almost none of its liquefied natural gas from the United States because it cannot afford to do so. So as a result of the Jones Act, a U.S. territory like Puerto Rico has less access to U.S. energy than even a foreign country. That's how unfair it is.
Okay, every time that there is an emergency in the island, for example, a storm, and when supplies are urgently needed, required, everyone starts talking about a potential Jones Act waiver. That's the main discussion. Why is it important to have this discussion, this conversation now, and not when an emergency is occurring, which is what's happened usually in the island?
Because Puerto Rico is facing an ongoing emergency. Puerto Rico has a failing electric grid, and the people of Puerto Rico are paying more and more for less and less. You know, in most places in the United States, people pay a single rate increase in a single year or in multiple years. The people of Puerto Rico have seen multiple rate increases in the span of a single year. Like if the people of New York and California or Texas or Florida were to see multiple rate hikes in the span of a single year, there would be riots. There would be pitchforks on the streets. And so if it's unfair to the mainland United States, it should be considered unfair to the people of Puerto Rico. And as I said, the Jones Act is a tax. It raises the cost of living. There was a report showing that it cost households in Puerto Rico $700 million, about $200 per citizen. And it raises the cost of doing business. I mean, how can you build an economy without access to reliable and affordable energy?
Why do you think Congress has enacted for a permanent lifting of the Jones Act in Puerto Rico?
There's a powerful lobby for the Jones Act, right? There's a shipping industry that's deeply invested in the Jones Act. But I feel if the federal government feels strongly about the Jones Act, the federal government should pay the cost.
Okay.
It should not transfer the cost to Puerto Rico, which is struggling to survive.
What do you think about the argument that Jones Act maintain good paying jobs in the territory and ensure reliable cargo transportation to and from the island? Because that is one of the main arguments that groups and unions use to support the application of the Jones Act in Puerto Rico?
I mean, until recently, there was not a single tanker complying with the Jones Act that could deliver energy to Puerto Rico. So it's just false. Like there were literally no tankers that could comply with the Jones Act and bring energy efficiently to Puerto Rico.
Okay. Does the bill has any co-sponsors while we are talking now about the bill or not?
We're at the beginning of the legislative process, so we just introduced the bill, but we're optimistic that we can build bipartisan support. There's going to be bipartisan opposition, but there could be bipartisan support as well.
What are you going to do to convince the legislator that this is a bill that is needed for Puerto Rico and for the other jurisdictions?
Look, I would tell my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle is, we lost the 2024 election because of inflation. Like the number one issue that matters to voters is the cost of living. And so our mission as Democrats, our mission as members of Congress should be to lower the cost of living for all Americans, including the 3 million people who call Puerto Rico home.
Okay.
And so my legislation would lower the cost of electricity for the people on the island.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what is happening, what is going on in the island, because the governor has said that natural gas is the solution in response to the generation deficit, which is a big problem in the island. But I want to know up to what point you think the authorities in the island should prioritize natural gas instead of renewable energy.
Well, the two goals are not mutually exclusive. So in the short term, we have to ensure that there's a functioning grid. There's enough energy generation to keep the lights on. Like that's the highest priority in the short term. But in the long term, there should be a transition to clean energy in order to combat catastrophic climate change. So I do not see a conflict between those two goals. I see one as short term and one as long term.
Okay. I ask you this because, when there is a storm and the power lines falls down, people have to wait like days, if not weeks, for Luma to fix the problem, right? You have seen that, everyone have seen that. On the other hand, some people with solar panels, for example, they don't have to rely on the government to respond to the emergency. It's more fast, the response. The individuals are closer to the solar panels, and at the same time, it can reduce the monthly bill a significant amount. Shouldn't that be the first option of the government in Puerto Rico, the solar panels, for example, and not the natural gas?
I'm in favor of solar panels and windmills and nuclear energy, but we have to ensure that Puerto Rico has sufficient energy in the short term. So like Puerto Rico is in danger of facing an even worse grid crisis in the summer. Okay. Like I've seen, so a properly functioning grid should have no more than 1 day of insufficient generation every 10 years. Puerto Rico is projected to experience generation shortfalls for 90 days.
Okay.
From the beginning of June to the end of September. So 3 out of 4 months. So for me, the highest priority is to ensure that there's enough energy to keep the lights on. Okay,
I understand what you say. What do you think about the sudden stop of funds from Comunidades Resilientes, por ejemplo, administered by the DOE? Because this is a big discussion right now in Congress and in Puerto Rico, because there is a stop in the funding of Comunidades Resilientes. Do you think those funds should be released from the federal government?
I'm against any and all freezes of federal funding to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico needs every dollar that it can get. And so I oppose any funding freeze.
Okay. There is a chance to cancel Luma's contract, or at least that is what the governor said recently. I ask you, do you think this is the time to advance in that process and find another entity that will replace Luma? If the answer is yes, who should that entity be?
I mean, I'm in no position to evaluate who's the best operator of the grid, but if the government can find a better operator, then it should. But, the concern is if you choose a new operator, how long will it take to transition?
Yeah.
So if the search for a new operator will delay the reconstruction of the grid by years, then I would have concerns.
Okay, but you sent a letter to Chris Wright, Secretary of the DOE, regarding the need to expedite the vegetation clearance, specifically. At the end of the day, is Luma the one in charge of the despeje de vegetación, como se le dice en español, que es una de las principales causas de los apagones en Puerto Rico? FEMA already approved 5 projects. Basically, the ball is in Luma's court. That's the situation. What can the DOE do to advance that process?
Not clear. The ball is in Luma's court, but it's also in the court of the government of Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And it's also in the court of the federal government. Like Luma and the government of Puerto Rico are constrained by federal rules and regulations. So during one of the congressional hearings, Luma pointed out that vegetation is a disproportionate driver of outages in Puerto Rico, which seems to be an accepted fact. And there are about 16,000 miles of vegetation that were allowed to grow under transmission lines. So every time the wind blows intensely or it rains intensely, it causes massive outages, causing hundreds of thousands or even millions of people to lose access to electricity. So I asked Luma, how long will it take you to clear the vegetation? Luma responded, the physical process is 3 years. But if the federal government mandates an environmental impact statement, it would take 8 years. 8 years to me is unacceptable. It took the United States 1 year to build the Empire State Building. It should not take us 8 years to clear vegetation. And so I'm in favor of expediting environmental review, so that we can clear the vegetation as soon as possible and prevent mass outages on the island.
So that is what is basically stopping the process, the permit, mitigation permit, or what exactly, based on the information that you have?
Yeah, so my understanding is, and it's not, which I think is insanity, the vegetation clearance is not a single project, it's multiple projects. And each project has its own environmental review. And if there's a project that has an environmental impact statement, it's going to draw the process for much longer. And that to me is just inefficient. Like, we need a streamlined process for getting the job done.
Okay. Last year, you sent another letter to FEMA, and you talk about reconstruction. And you asked to base federal funding for reconstruction projects on updated cost estimates. How this issue continues to affect the course of reconstruction in Puerto Rico and the completion of infrastructure projects?
It causes Puerto Rico to receive far less funding than it should. So the federal government provides federal funding either through reimbursements or advance payments based on cost estimates. The trouble is that the cost estimates are outdated. The cost estimates came before the inflation shock after COVID. And so we need updated estimates that factor in the impact of inflation, the higher cost of construction, the higher cost of materials, so that Puerto Rico can receive its fair share of federal funding. There's a gap between the funding that Puerto Rico needs versus the funding that it's actually receiving. There's disagreement. I mean, obviously Congress has the authority to do it, but I would argue that the administration could do it administratively, but I'm in favor of legislation that would update the cost estimates.
Okay. You mentioned FEMA, and I mentioned FEMA. In what way you think the proposed FEMA reconstruction announced by Trump administration will affect the reconstruction of Puerto Rico?
It's going to do harm. I mean, Puerto Rico, every state and territory depends heavily on FEMA during a natural disaster. And Puerto Rico is especially dependent on FEMA. And if the Trump administration and DOGE decimate FEMA, it's going to do an enormous amount of harm to an enormous number of people in Puerto Rico. It's.
What do you think about the argument that this will solve the bureaucracy problem in FEMA and at the same time facilitate the funding release? Because that's one of the main arguments of the administration.
The goal of the Trump administration is not to make the government more efficient, it's to make it less efficient by decimating it.
Okay. My last question will be, why you think Trump hasn't made an official and public mention of Puerto Rico? It's been how many months? 3 months in power, and we haven't heard anything about. Why do you think that that's the situation right now?
I do not think that Donald Trump cares about Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Trump.
I'm sorry. Yes, continue.
No, Donald Trump cares about no one and nothing but himself and his own enrichment.
Okay. So you don't expect in the next months like an announcement or something related to Puerto Rico?
Donald Trump is no friend of Puerto Rico, and we found that out from his first term.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he has said nothing about Puerto Rico, even though it has the worst infrastructure crisis in the country, tells you everything you need to know about Donald Trump and where his priorities lie. And Puerto Rico is not one of his priorities.
Okay. I can finish without asking you about the status debate, about the status issue. Is there any chance to address this topic in this session or not?
The current Congress is unlikely to resolve the status question. The debate will continue.
Okay. Some Democrats say that it's Jennifer Gonzalez's task or job to convince Republicans to move forward with this topic. Do you agree or you don't agree?
Well, it's not. I mean, there's disagreement not only among Republicans, but also within the Democratic Party.
Okay.
My view on status is different from the views that are held by other Democrats. I'm in favor of statehood. Mm-hmm. There are other Democrats who prefer Commonwealth, and there are others who prefer independence. So not all of us are on the same page.
So is that the topic is dead in the Congress right now?
No, there's the Puerto Rico Status Act, which is a compromise. It might be the best hope for resolving the status question, but I doubt that it's going to be resolved in this Congress. This Congress is controlled by Republicans. It's too dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. I feel like the best hope for resolving the status question is a Democratic Congress, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House with a Democratic president.
Okay. Representative Ritchie Torres from the Bronx, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for answering my questions. And we'll keep in touch to discuss many other topics related to Puerto Rico.
Take care.
Bye.